You'll need to progress through several steps to develop packages and deploy them from one environment to another. And these steps can include, first of all, you need to develop the package, of course, in SQL Server Data Tools. Deployment of a package starts with designing and developing the package. Not only do you develop the ETL process or application logic in SQL Server Data Tools, you also need to set up successful deployments by planning for deployment early in the development cycle. You need to create configurations. When you create a package, think about what might change from one environment to another. For example, OLADB connection strings and flat file connections are likely to change from one environment to another. These kinds of environment-specific settings are ideal for embedding in configurations. Then you need to build the package with a deployment utility. Use SQL Server Data Tools to build the package and include a deployment utility. This creates a folder of objects that you can copy to a target environment in order to deploy the package. And then you copy the deployment folder to a target machine and run the package installation wizard. The target machine may be a test or staging server, which allows you to work out any issues with deployment before updating the production server. In either case, you run the package installation wizard locally on the target machine once you copy the deployment folder. And then you make configuration changes, any necessary changes, inside the wizard. So when you run the package installation wizard on the target machine, you can modify any deployment-sensitive properties, things like connection strings, that are in the configurations file. This adapts the package to run in the target environment. The package development and deployment process can be as simple or comprehensive as you wish, as it can be with software development. Deploying a package is conceptually similar to building an installation package for software. But the steps you use, the tools available, and the end result are all quite different for packages and software. And I'll be talking about a lot of the different options that you have, and in particular the different tools that you can use. Now, successful deployment of integration services packages can involve a number of challenges. It's important to plan for deployment early in the development process to overcome these challenges. So first and foremost, you need to ensure that the package works in production once you deploy it. This environment is likely to be different from the development environment. So during development, be aware of the differences and build support for adapting the package to its target environment. And you may need to have it adapt to multiple target environments. Similarly, you should work to minimize the changes to the package you need to make when deploying to other environments. If you have to make any changes that require rebuilding the package for every new environment, you'll greatly increase the work required for deployment and increase the chances of introducing new problems in each new environment. Instead, do your best to make packages robust when deployed to other environments. You should develop a reproducible process when deploying a package from development to testing to production and any other intermediate steps, and then document the process. If you have a well-defined process, a recipe for deployment, it'll be far easier for you to migrate environment-sensitive components. A reproducible and documented process also eliminates problems that depend on any team member's recollection of arcane details necessary for a successful migration. And that person inevitably leaves for a vacation on a remote tropical island just before you need to do a large deployment. Happens every time. Also, plan to be able to roll back changes to a target environment. At times, you may need to remove deployed objects due to problems with your deployment. You need to be able to identify these deployment objects, where they reside on the server, and where you need to go to fix them. This may or may not be an automated process that you develop, but integration services doesn't have really robust support for this kind of challenge. And that makes documentation very important. And then you should also have a plan for redeploying updated packages. You may need to change a package after you deploy it to production, such as to fix errors on a production package. You should consider how to version packages and which steps you'll need for redeployment, which dependent files you need to synchronize, and any other version-related changes you need to make in the target environment. Okay, so this is just a sampling of possible deployment challenges. and they'll vary greatly with your level of skill with integration services, package requirements, and the environment in which the package is going to run. The important thing is that you should think about these challenges early in package development so you can minimize their effects while simplifying the implementation of solutions to the challenges. Integration services and SQL Server data tools have some support for mitigating these challenges, but the earlier you consider them, the better able you'll be to successfully overcome them. Certain aspects of an integration services package are sensitive to deployment and the target environment. These are the properties and settings that depend on the environment in which they reside, that you'll need to change when deploying to a new environment. And some of these kind of deployment-sensitive components include server and database names and connection strings. Connection strings, such as localhost or specific machine as the name for the development server, need to be changed to the name of the production server when you deploy the package to the production environment. Of course, if you use local or localhost and that works on the target server, then you're good to go. But you need an easy way to migrate these types of changes when deploying packages to other environments. You also need to consider flat file paths. Paths to import or export flat file locations may not be the same in the production environment as they are in the development or even the testing environment. It's great if they are, but sometimes that's just not possible. A file path that points to a file under the C directory structure in development may be on a different drive letter in production, or you may require a change to a UNC, or a Universal or Uniform Naming Convention path. And then another issue is the location of configuration files. You can save various properties, such as connection strings, to a configuration file in the file system. You may need to change the path to a configuration file, as you need to with flat files when you deploy a package. So these are some of the most common deployment-sensitive components that you'll encounter in your package. But there are likely to be others, depending on what the package does and what resources it uses. By being aware of these components and settings as you develop your package, you'll make deployment far easier and more robust. Integration services includes a number of utilities that can ease the deployment process and provide solutions to the deployment challenges that you face. These utilities help you build integration services package that support deployment. One of the most important is package configurations. Package configurations are objects that you use to specify the values of deployment-sensitive properties. You need to carefully consider how you store package configurations. Many configuration types are available to choose from, two of which are direct configuration mode and indirect configuration mode. You can store object properties in an XML file when you use either direct or indirect configuration modes. With direct configurations, the integration services package checks a specific file path location stored within the location is stored within the package for the configuration file. Direct configurations are a good choice when you set the path to the configuration file to be identical in all environments. But then you can also use indirect configurations. When you use configuration files with indirect configurations, an environment variable specifies where the package check for the XML file, the configuration file. That variable enables you to edit the location of the XML configuration file without having to open and edit the entire package. Okay, another tool is the Package Installation Wizard. This wizard installs a package for use on the target environment. You can use the wizard to edit the configuration values without having to open the package or its configuration file in an editor. Run the Package Installation Wizard on the target server after you build the package, create a deployment utility, and copy the deployment folder to the new machine. And then you can use DTExec runtime parameters. DTExec is a utility for running integration services packages that you can invoke from the command line or from SQL Agent. You can set package configuration values on the fly by passing runtime parameters to DTExec. Now, the ultimate goal when planning for deployment is to move the package to the target server and ensure that the package works by changing only as much as necessary, without having to edit or rebuild the package. All right, let me talk a little bit more about this package deployment utility. The full version of Visual Studio, in which SQL Server Data Tools is built, includes support for building installation packages for software. These templates and tools take all of a project's source code, resources, and build scripts and combine them into one or a few installation files, such as setup.exe or setup.msi. You can then deliver the installation files to users who can run the installer. Users end up with a fully installed and configured version of your software on their system, including new registry settings, databases, and other resources needed by the software. Because it runs within the integration services environment, deploying integration services packages don't generally require the amount of system configuration that a software application does. But you still need to gather together the required files, including the package itself, ready to deploy to the target server. SQL Server Data Tools has all the tools necessary for creating what Microsoft calls a deployment utility. A deployment utility is a folder with the required files, as well as a file with the SSIS deployment manifest extension. On the target server, you can run this deployment manifest file to launch the package installation wizard in order to configure the package for use. Really makes it pretty easy. Now, creating a deployment utility involves setting a few properties within the integration services package's project properties. When the properties are set to create a deployment utility, SQL Server Data Tools will create the utility the next time you build the project. Okay, so you control the deployment utility with three different properties. First one is Create Deployment Utility. SQL Server Data Tools uses this property to determine whether it creates a deployment utility when it builds a package. The default value is false. That's why you don't get a deployment utility every time you create a new package. In most cases, all you need to do to create a utility is to set this property to true and leave the other properties set to their default values. But you have more flexibility than that. The second property is the Allow Configuration Change property. This property specifies whether the user installing the package can change the configuration settings during deployment. If set to true, the user can change the property values within a configuration file if a configuration file exists when they run the package install wizard. The default value is true. Now, one thing to consider when you set the Allow Configuration Change property is whether the person or team responsible for the deployment knows the correct values for properties within the configuration file. For example, if the developer of the package is also the person deploying the package, then you may want to set Allow Configuration Change to true. But if the DBA responsible for deployment does not have in-depth knowledge of the package settings, then perhaps you should set Allow Configuration Change to false and set the configuration values appropriately for the target environment before building the project. All right, then the third property is Deployment Output Path. This property tells SQL Server Data Tools where to build the deployment folder relative to the path of the project folder, and the default setting is bin/deployment. When it creates the deployment utility, when Create Deployment Utility is set to true, SQL Server Data Tools creates a deployment folder when you build the project. The deployment folder contains the files that you need to deploy the package to the new environment. By default, the deployment folder is located under the package's bin folder, as I mentioned, although you can change that location. Now, the deployment folder includes copies of the .dtsx package files, copies of the .dtsx config configuration files, if there are any, a newly created deployment manifest file that describes the deployment itself, and any other miscellaneous files that you included in the project. The miscellaneous files can be items such as a README file, Excel import files, or an XML schema file that you use in a package. The deployment folder contains everything necessary for you to deploy the project on the target machine. You can use any familiar copying mechanism to copy the deployment folder to the target server. For example, you could use a DOS copy command, xcopy, drag and drop through Windows Explorer, file transfer protocol, or FTP, and other tools to deliver the deployment folder to the new environment. And by the way, you can add dependent files to a package deployment through SQL Server Data Tools by right-clicking the project name in Solution Explorer of an integration services project and selecting Add New Item or Add Existing Item. All right, I've mentioned a deployment manifest. The deployment manifest file is an XML file with the default name of project, whatever the project name is, .ssis deployment manifest. When you double-click a file with an extension of SSIS deployment manifest in Windows Explorer, where you have installed integration services, Windows will launch the package installation wizard, and you can get right to work. So this manifest file contains information that the package installation wizard needs in order to deploy the package. So it's an XML file and includes things like generated by, which is an attribute of the DTS deployment manifest node that shows which account generated the manifest. Generated from project name indicates the project that SQL Server Data Tools created this manifest for. Generated date, the date that Data Tools generated this manifest. Allow configuration changes, that's the property that I mentioned, that you can allow the user who's installing the package to make configuration property changes. Package is the full file name of the package. And configuration file shows the name of the configuration file for this package.